"Don't move," Silas said, barely above a whisper. The horse's breath steamed in the air between them, coming fast now, uneven. Snow blew in sideways sheets across the high ridge, howling like something alive. Silas couldn't see more than 30 feet, but he'd heard it again. A sound that didn't belong in the wind, a scream, human, young. The gelding stamped, nervous under him. Silas slid down from the saddle, boots crunching into hard, packed snow that rose near his knees. The scream came again. Closer this time, high-pitched, torn in half. He yanked his rifle free, held it low. Every instinct screamed to turn back. No man with sense stayed out past dark in a Wyoming whiteout. Not this far north. Not with snow like this clawing through your coat. But he moved forward anyway, 20 paces down the slope, through swirling gusts that stung his eyes. He saw her, a child, standing in the middle of a drift. Shaking so hard he thought she might fall apart from it, bare hands clenched around a crooked stick. Face streaked red from wind or something worse. She looked about 5. Her hair was frozen to her cheeks in long, stiff clumps. She didn't cry. She was too far past that. Behind her, half buried in snow, lay a body, female, still, too still. "Easy," Silas said, raising one hand. "I ain't gonna hurt you." The girl didn't move, just blinked, slow and hard, as if trying to focus. Then she raised the stick. "Don't touch her." Silas lowered to one knee. The wind shoved against his coat, sharp and endless. "She's your ma." The girl didn't answer. "I've got a cabin downridge. Firewater. Food. Medicine." Still no answer. "She needs help, kid. And you're near froze to death." That seemed to stir her. She blinked again and looked behind her. She said she'd wake up, the girl said. "She said we'd go to Montana." "Montana's west," Silas said quietly. "You're walking the wrong way." The stick dipped an inch. The girl's lips split when she tried to speak again. "She promised she wouldn't leave me." Silas stepped forward. "I can carry her. But we gotta move now." "No." She raised the stick again. Her fingers were purple. "She's not dead," the girl said. "I stayed. I didn't leave her. Even when it got dark." A gust knocked her sideways. She staggered but didn't fall, didn't drop the stick. Silas felt something split inside his ribs. "I'm not gonna let her die out here," he said. "She said not to trust men." "That's fair," he said. "But I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking for a chance." She didn't lower the stick, but she stepped aside. Silas moved to the body. The woman's face was gray, mouth open slightly. Her coat was torn along the left side, soaked black at the seam. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Weak pulse. "She's alive." The girl made no sound. Silas slung his rifle back over his shoulder, scooped the woman into his arms. She weighed less than a bag of oats. "You got a name?" he asked. The girl didn't speak. He looked at her again. "You walkin' or ridin'?" She didn't answer, just followed. The gelding didn't like the new load. Silas tied the woman tight across the saddle, swung the girl up behind her, and climbed on last. "Hold on," he said. The girl's hands gripped the back of his coat like claws. "Talk to her," Silas said over his shoulder. "Let her know you're there." The girl leaned forward, her mouth close to the woman's ear. "Mama," she whispered. "It's me." They rode slow. The wind turned their skin raw. Silas counted fence posts in the dark. By the time they reached the cabin, the woman was burning hot against his back, fever, fast, moving. He carried her inside and laid her on the only bed. The girl climbed up next to her, still clutching the stick. Silas stripped off his coat, built the fire higher, then pulled a tin of water from the stove and poured it into the basin. Under the lamplight, he examined the wound, torn fabric, crude stitches, half ripped. The skin around it glistened red and wet with infection. But that wasn't the part that made him stop. Above the wound, along her ribs, was a second mark, a wide bruise, purple and sick, looking rectangular. It looked like the butt of a rifle, too clean to be from a fall, too deliberate. He didn't say anything, just reached for his knife. The girl spoke for the first time since the ride. "If she dies, I'll hate you forever." He looked at her. "I'd expect nothing less." He heated the blade and started cutting. By midnight, she hadn't moved. The girl had fallen asleep upright, head against her mother's arm. Silas sat in the chair by the bed, watching her breathe. The storm screamed against the cabin walls. He reached over, pulled the girl's stick gently from her sleeping fingers, and laid it on the table beside him. Then he heard the hinge creak. He stood fast, grabbed the rifle from the corner, moved to the door. Outside, nothing but white, but across the threshold, stamped into the snow, was a single set of boot prints, pointed toward the cabin, no prints leading away, and on the windowsill, half melted, was a shred of red cloth nailed there with a square, headed tack. He closed the door and bolted it. Then he checked the back window. The latch had been turned. The fire cracked once behind him, sharp and sudden. Silas didn't turn. He just said, "She promised she wouldn't leave me," the girl whispered, and then she collapsed. The fever didn't break. Silas wiped her forehead again with the cloth, now warm and slick with sweat. Cora Belle stirred but didn't wake. Her breath rattled shallow in her chest, her body burning hot beneath the bandages. He'd cut away the worst of the infected flesh last night, cleaned the wound with whiskey, stitched it neat and tight with his last good needle. And still, she burned. He wrung out the cloth and dipped it back into the basin. The water had cooled, but not fast enough. Everything in this place was either too slow or too late. The girl, Annie, sat on the floor, back against the bed frame, knees pulled to her chest. She hadn't spoken since that last whisper before she'd collapsed. Hadn't cried either. She just sat there face blank, staring at the wall. A small bundle of fabric clutched in her hands. Silas couldn't tell if it was part of her mother's dress or something she'd carried with her from the trail. He crouched down beside her. "Need you to eat something, kid." No response. He set the bowl down beside her. Stew from yesterday, warm again but bland. She didn't even glance at it. "I know you're scared," he said quietly. "Hell, I am too. But we can't sit in the dark and wait for her to get better. We gotta help her do it." Still nothing. Silas stood, crossed the room, opened the chest near the stove, and pulled out the tin of willow bark. He ground some with the flat of his knife, mixed it into water, and brought it back to the bed. "Seem on now," he muttered, easing Cora's head up. "Stay with me." Her eyes fluttered, half-lidded, unfocused. He managed to get some of the liquid down her throat. Not much, but enough to count. Her skin felt wrong, tight and too hot in some places, ice-cold in others. Her fingers twitched now, and then like they were trying to hold onto something that wasn't there. Silas sat back down in the chair and rubbed his hands over his face. She was worse than the men he'd pulled off battlefields, worse than the old wounds that festered days after they should have killed someone. This was fast, furious, the kind of sickness that didn't argue. It just took, behind him. The wind slapped hard against the cabin walls again. The storm hadn't let up since last night. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe that was the point. The girl's voice came, small and low. "You said it would help." Silas turned the willow bark. She nodded, eyes still on the wall. "It might," he said. "It ain't perfect. Just slows the burn. Sometimes that's enough." She looked at him then. Her face was pale, drawn in a way that didn't belong to a child. Like the muscles in it had stopped growing up and just hardened. She always knew how to fix things, she said. She was a teacher. Before. Silas leaned forward. Before what? Before she could answer, the woman on the bed moaned. It wasn't a sound of waking, it was pain. Deep, gut, level pain that twisted out of her throat, like it didn't want to be heard, but couldn't help it. Annie was on her feet in a blink. "Mama." Cora's head jerked once. Side to side her lips moved, but no words came out. Her arms trembled like they were trying to rise. Then she went still again. Silas stepped forward. "Get her water." Annie ran to the stove. She knew where the tin was now. She brought it fast, splashing some on her hands but not stopping. Silas helped Cora swallow what she could. After a moment her eyes opened, wide, wild, rosy. She croaked. Annie froze. "No," Cora whispered. "Where's—" Her hand lashed out, weak but sudden, catching Silas's wrist. "Don't you touch her." "Don't? It's all right," he said. "She's right here. You're safe." But Cora didn't hear him. Her head turned toward the window, eyes unfocused. "I told her to run. Told her to hide if they came back." Annie reached for her mother's hand. "Mama, I stayed," she said. "I didn't run. I stayed with you. I didn't leave." Something shifted then. Cora's eyes found her daughter's face. Her body went still. "My brave girl," she whispered. Silas took a breath. Annie climbed onto the bed and curled beside her mother, careful of the stitches, her hand wrapped around Cora's arm like a rope. The fire hissed behind them. Silas turned away, giving them what privacy he could in a one-room cabin. He added more wood to the stove, counted supplies in his head. What little food he had left would last another day, maybe two. After that, they'd have to risk the trail, if the storm broke. But that wasn't the part that troubled him most. He walked to the door, unbolted it, and stepped outside. The wind cut across the ridge like broken glass. Snow drifted in every corner. He squinted into it, eyes scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. But the prints from last night were still there, mostly blown over now, but still visible. One set, heavy, boots, not moccasins, made by someone who knew how to stay quiet, but not quiet enough. He'd grown up tracking cattle thieves and coyotes. He knew what old prints looked like. These were no more than 12 hours cold. And they didn't come from the trail. They came from the east slope, where no one had business walking this time of year, unless they were hunting something. He shut the door and barred it again. Annie was asleep when he turned back. Cora's eyes were closed. Whether she was sleeping or not, he couldn't tell. He sat back down, pulled the girl's stick from the table and turned it over in his hands. Rough pine, cut fresh, bark still clung to the bottom, but there, near the top, was a notch, a clean slice through the grain, too straight for a natural break. Someone had marked it. He reached for the coat he'd stripped off earlier and pulled a square of red cloth from the inside pocket, the one he'd found on the windowsill, nailed there like a calling card. He didn't know what it meant, but it didn't feel random. Nothing about this did. He stared at the fire for a long time, feeling the weight of things shift inside him. He'd thought he was saving a dying woman and her daughter. Now he wasn't sure who was saving who. The wind shrieked again, louder this time. The cabin creaked as if the storm were pushing at it from all sides. Cora stirred once more, barely audible. "What day is it?" "Sunday," Silas said. She gave a rough, bitter laugh. "Still Sunday," she murmured. "Been Sunday for 3 days." He didn't correct her. Instead, he reached for the willow bark again. They weren't out of time, not yet. But they were running out of it. "She's burning up faster than I can pull her back," Silas said aloud. To no one. It was near midnight when Silas heard the girl's voice behind him. They were looking for something. He turned from the stove. The fire had burned low. Annie stood in the orange light, wrapped in one of his wool shirts that hung nearly to her boots. Her hair was tangled, face pale, eyes too old for 5. Silas knelt, setting the tin cup aside. "What do you mean?" She didn't move closer. "When they came to the wagon. The men who shot Papa. They didn't take the horses first. They didn't even want the money. One of 'em kept yelling about papers." "What kind of papers?" Annie shook her head. "I don't know. Mama said not to talk, just to stay under the tarp till it was over. But I heard one of them say, 'If she has it, we need her alive.'" Silas stood slowly. The wood floor creaked beneath him. "She didn't say that part before," he said. "I didn't remember." Her voice was flat, not guilty, just tired behind them. Cora stirred in the bed. She hadn't opened her eyes all day. The fever hadn't gone higher. But it hadn't broken either. Silas had done everything he could. What was left now was waiting. He walked over to the trunk in the corner, unlatched it, lifted the lid. Inside were tools, blankets, a pair of his old army boots, and beneath those, the oilskin envelope he'd found years ago, stuffed with folded pages and receipts from another man's life. Not what they'd be after. He closed the trunk. "You saw their faces?" he asked. Annie hesitated. "Only one. He had a scar on his chin, like someone split it open with a nail." Silas felt that detail sit down hard in the back of his brain. Not just the image, but the way she said it, like it was still right there. She walked over to the table and sat on the bench without asking. He brought her a half slice of bread, watched her tear it into tiny pieces without eating. "You said they wanted her alive." Annie nodded. "She wasn't supposed to be with us." Silas tilted his head. "Say again." "Mama. She wasn't coming at first. She was going to send me with Mr. Ray from the church. But the day we were supposed to leave, She changed her mind. Said she couldn't let me go alone. Said too many things didn't add up. Silas sat across from her. Like what? She got a letter. It made her cry, but she burned it before I could read it. I remember the paper smelled sweet, like perfume. She never wears perfume. He exhaled through his nose. This wasn't just a family running west after a death. There were pieces missing. A knock sounded, not on the door, on the far wall, a sharp, deliberate tap from the back corner. Silas was up in an instant, rifle in hand. Annie didn't move, didn't scream. He motioned her to the bed. She climbed in beside her mother without a word. He moved to the window, pulled back the cloth curtain an inch. Dark, too dark, then another tap, lower now, near the base of the wall. He moved fast, unbolting the front door, stepping out into the snow. The wind was calmer tonight. Crisp instead of wild, clouds broke overhead, letting moonlight spill across the drifts. No tracks. He circled the cabin, rifle raised. Then he saw it. A piece of metal embedded in the wall beneath the back window. A square tack, like the one from before, holding a new scrap of cloth. This one wasn't red, it was pale blue. Silas tore it free and brought it inside, held it under the lamplight. The edge had a print, half a word, ink smudged but legible, bank. He stared at it, then at Annie. She was watching him from the bed, small hand on her mother's arm. What kind of papers? He said to himself. Would a man be willing to kill for in the middle of nowhere? Cora moaned. Her skin had gone clammy. The fever was breaking. Or trying to. Silas grabbed a fresh cloth, dozed it, and laid it across her forehead. Her lips moved. He leaned closer. They know. Who knows? He asked. She didn't answer. Just the wind now, and the clock ticking above the stove. He sat back in the chair, cloth still in his hand. She always said Papa had secrets, Annie whispered. But she said he never meant them to hurt us. Silas looked at her. Secrets don't care what they're meant to do. She didn't flinch, just nodded. Outside, the horses in the shed gave a nervous huff. He stood again, went to the window, watched for a long time. The moon caught on something in the tree-lined metal, a glint, then gone. They were still watching, or someone was. He stepped back, reloaded the rifle, checked the bolts on both doors again. Then he walked to the table, sat down, and stared at the two pieces of cloth laid flat in front of him. One red, one blue, both left on his land, both driven in with the same square tack. Someone's marking her, he said. Annie blinked. For what? He didn't answer. He didn't know. But this wasn't about running anymore. This was about being hunted. He looked over at Cora. Her eyes had opened again, unfocused but alive. She was trying to speak. Her mouth moved without sound. Then, faintly, don't trust the man in the coat. What man? Silas leaned in. Cora blinked slowly, her face pulling tight with pain. He said he was family. She closed her eyes again. Annie was shaking now. Silas pulled the blanket over her shoulders. It's all right, he said. You're safe. Annie looked up at him, and this time she didn't nod. Instead, she said, They weren't bandits. He stared at her. What? They didn't take the money. They left it right there on the trail. She looked at her hands. They only took the envelope. They weren't bandits. Silas muttered. They were sent. The storm broke just before dawn. Silas stepped outside, rifle slung low, boots crunching through the crusted snow. The wind had calmed overnight, leaving a stillness that felt more like holding a breath than peace. The sky was washed pale gray. No stars, no sun yet, just silence and cold. He moved toward the shed, past the half-frozen creek that cut through his land. The horses were skittish again, ears pinned, eyes wide, steam blowing from their nostrils. He fed them quick, checked their legs, calmed them with quiet words he didn't think about. Routine. But the back of his neck was prickling. He turned slowly, scanning the tree line. Then he saw it, just beyond the last post of the north fence. Something hanging. He walked to it, steps slow, steady. A strip of fabric, bright white, tied deliberately to the top wire, fluttering now in the breeze like a flag. He pulled it free and turned it over. No print this time. But stitched into one corner in red thread was a single letter. A. He stared at it, fingers tightening. Annie. The name hit like a hammer to the ribs. He didn't run back. He moved fast but careful, scanning ground, branches, shadows. The girl and her mother were still asleep when he stepped inside. Cora had finally cooled sometime in the night. She was breathing more regular now, face less gray, alive. Annie lay curled up beside her. Safe for now. He folded the fabric, slipped it into his coat, and bolted the door. They weren't just being watched. They were being tested, marked, tracked. Whoever was out there knew exactly what he'd find this morning, and what it would do to him, and he'd be damned if he'd wait for the next move. He packed what he could: salt pork, hard bread, the last of the beans, water skins, the old blanket from under the bed, a second rifle and a pouch of shells, the sled from the barn, heavy canvas stretched between two curved runners, built for hauling logs or meat. He was halfway through loading it when Annie stirred. She sat up, blinking. "You're leaving?" she asked. He looked over. "We're leaving." Her eyes went to her mother. "She can't ride." "She won't have to." He finished tightening the ropes, stepped back inside. Cora opened her eyes when he touched her shoulder. "Storm's past," he said. "We've got maybe 12 hours of clean sky, maybe less." She nodded weakly. "How far?" 10 miles east. "Less if we cut straight across the bluff." Her face tightened. "You've got someone." "Maybe. He's old. Lives like a ghost. But he knows the land. And if he says no?" Silas didn't answer. Cora sat up with his help. She winced but didn't cry out. "I can walk." "You can't." He said, not unkindly, "but I can pull." She looked over at Annie. "You sure this is safer?" "No," he said. "But this cabin's already been picked clean." They moved slow, every step measured. Cora bundled in blankets and strapped tight to the sled, Annie riding behind her, arms around her mother's waist. Silas led on foot, the rope over his shoulder, pulling them through the snow, packed trail he'd carved days ago, now drifted half shut. The sun never showed. The clouds just turned lighter, flatter. The wind carried less bite but more weight, like it was holding something back. By midday they'd reached the ridge above the ravine. The path down was steep, ice slicked, one wrong shift in the sled, and they'd roll. "We'll walk this part," he said. Annie slid off first, helped steady the sled while Silas guided it inch by inch. Cora gritted her teeth but didn't speak. Her face was pale again, sweat beading under her hairline. Halfway down, Annie stumbled, caught herself. Silas turned. "You all right?" She nodded, brushing snow from her knees, but her eyes were wide, locked on the trees below. He followed her gaze. Someone was standing at the bottom of the hill, not moving, just watching. Black coat, broad hat, hands behind his back like he was waiting in church. Silas froze. The rope slipped slightly in his grip. Then the figure turned and walked into the trees. Gone. No tracks. No sound. Just gone. Cora saw his face. "What is it?" "Keep your head down," he said. They pushed on, crossed the creek, past the line of black pines, climbed the slope to the clearing. Elijah McCrae's cabin stood where it always had, tucked low into the hill, half covered in snow. Chimney puffing smoke like an old man sighing. Silas didn't knock. He walked straight to the door and banged once with the butt of his fist. Footsteps. Then the door opened. Elijah looked the same as the last time Silas had seen him. 10 years older than he ought to be, eyes sharp behind weather, beaten lids, gray beard braided in 2 loose knots. "Hell," Elijah said. "I thought you were dead." "Not yet." The old man stepped aside. "You bring guests. Need a place to stop the bleeding." Elijah looked at Cora, then at Annie. "Can't stay long," he said. "Not if they're following." "We won't," Silas said. "Just a day." Elijah nodded once. "Then get inside. I'll take the sled." They settled fast. Cabin was smaller than Silas's but warmer, cleaner. Elijah brewed something dark and bitter on the stove, handed Silas a cup without asking. "You get eyes on the old man asked. "Just one, this morning. Black coat." Elijah grunted. "They always wear black when they think they're official." Silas didn't ask what he meant. Cora lay on a bed of pelts in the corner, breathing shallow but steady. Annie stayed close, clutching a scrap of the blanket. Elijah watched them both. "I know her," he said. Silas looked up. "Elijah? She's a belle. From Cheyenne. Married into the Whitlock family. Banker's boy." "Not anymore," Silas said. Elijah gave a dry laugh. "No, he's dead. But the land he held ain't, and neither is the paper tied to it." Silas stiffened. "You're telling me this is about inheritance?" Elijah shook his head. Not just. That girl ain't just his blood. She's the only one left with legal claim to a parcel that's sittin' on 2 veins of silver and a rail contract. Jesus. Yeah. Silas stood. You think they'll come here? Elijah nodded toward the mountains. They've already come. A man showed up in Lander 2 days back. Lawyer. Brought federal papers. Says the girl was taken. Said the mother's not fit. That a claim's been filed. Be who? Elijah's voice was flat. By the family? Silas felt something in his chest locked tight. They'll want to take her. They won't ask. Silas turned toward the corner where Annie lay sleeping. Small hand still wrapped around her mother's wrist. He looked back at Elijah. How long do we have? The old man shrugged. You've got 2 days before he brings the marshals. They did not leave at once. Elijah made them wait until the light flattened out. Until the hills stopped throwing shadows long enough for a man to see what was coming. He moved slow but without hesitation, gathering things from hooks and shelves like he'd known for years this day would arrive. Dried meat, powder, a map so worn it was more cloth than paper. Silas watched him from the doorway, pulling on his gloves. You sure you're up for this? Silas asked. Elijah didn't look up. I've been up for worse with less. Cora stirred on the bed of pelts. Her color was better than it had been, but the strength hadn't come back with it. She tried to sit and failed. Annie was at her side in a breath, small hands bracing her mother's shoulder. We're moving again, Cora said, voice rough but steady. Elijah said, but not fast, and not straight. Good, Cora murmured. Straight's how they find you. Silas packed what little food they had left into a canvas sack. When he tied it off, he felt the weight and frowned. That's it, he said. Elijah glanced over. How long? 2 days, maybe, if we're careful. Elijah nodded once. Then we won't be careful. We'll be fast. Cora met Silas's eyes. You don't owe us this. Silas slung the bag over his shoulder. I know. They left Elijah's cabin just before noon, cutting north into the broken country where the hills rose sharp and close together. No trails, just rock, snow, and scrub pine bent low by the wind. The sled creaked under Cora's weight as Silas pulled. Annie walked beside him, her steps small but steady. She didn't complain, didn't ask questions. Every so often she glanced back, eyes scanning the ridgeline behind them. After the first mile, Elijah took the lead. Watch your footing here, he said. Snow's thin. Creek runs under it. They crossed single file. Silas felt the ice sag beneath his boots, water sloshing somewhere below. He didn't stop until they were well clear. They hadn't spoken in nearly an hour when Annie stopped short. Silas turned. What is it? She pointed ahead of them. The snow was disturbed, a wide arc. Darker than the rest. Silas stepped closer, crouched. Blood, not much, just a smear, fresh. Elijah knelt beside him, touched 2 fingers to it, rubbed them together. Still wet. Silas scanned the ground. Animal. Elijah shook his head. Too clean. And it moves uphill. Silas followed the trail with his eyes. It led toward the rocks above, where the wind had scarred the snow thin. Someone hurt, Silas said. Or someone marking. Annie swallowed. Is it Mama's? Cora leaned up on the sled, trying to see. Silas shook his head. No, you're all right. They moved again, slower now. Every sound felt louder. The scrape of the sled runners, the rasp of breath in the cold air. Silas kept his rifle loose in his hands. The blood trail stopped near a stand of trees. Elijah raised a hand. They froze. A shape lay just beyond the trunks. Silas moved first, stepped around the nearest pine and saw the man crumpled in the snow. One leg twisted wrong, coat torn at the shoulder. He was alive, eyes fluttering, mouth moving without sound. Jesus, Silas muttered. Elijah crouched, checked the man's pulse. Not one of them. Elijah said, this one's local. The man's eyes opened. He tried to speak again. Blood bubbled at his lips. Don't, Silas said. Save your breath. The man's hand clawed weakly at Silas's sleeve. His fingers were stained red. There behind. He whispered. Ooh. Elijah asked. The man coughed. Riders. 2. Blackcoats. Silas felt the words settle like lead. They shoot you. The man shook his head. Horse fell. They didn't stop. Elijah straightened. They were moving fast. They are, the man said. His gaze slid past them, unfocused. You can't outrun papers. Then his eyes rolled back. Silas stood slowly. We can't leave him. Elijah met his gaze. We can't take him. Silas clenched his jaw, looked back toward the sled. Cora was watching, eyes sharp despite her weakness. Annie stood beside her, pale and quiet. Silas turned back to the man. We can get him to your cabin, he said to Elijah. Elijah shook his head. Too far. He won't make it. Silas knelt, pulled the man's coat tighter around him, packed snow around his leg to slow the bleeding. What's your name? Silas asked. The man's eyes fluttered. Thomas, he breathed. Tell my wife. His chest shuddered, then stilled. Silas closed his eyes. When he stood, his hands were shaking. We move, Elijah said softly. Now. They didn't argue again. They left the body where it lay, marked the spot with a broken branch. Annie looked back once, then fixed her eyes on the ground and did not look again. The land rose steeper now. Rocks cut through the snow like broken teeth. Silas felt the rope bite into his shoulder as he pulled the sled upward, every step a small fight. By late afternoon, the sky darkened again. Elijah stopped near a narrow cut between two hills. We camp here. Silas shook his head. We keep moving. We don't, Elijah said. Not if you want her alive. Cora's breathing had grown shallow again. The color had drained from her face. The fever was stirring. They built a low fire behind a rock wall, barely enough to warm hands. Elijah rationed food without discussion, 1 strip of meat each, wider sparingly. Silas watched Annie chew slowly, eyes fixed on the fire. We won't make Lander in time, Silas said quietly. Elijah nodded. Then we won't go to Lander first. Silas looked at him. There's another way, Elijah said. Judge Whitfield still rides circuit south of there. If we reach him before the lawyer locks him down. Silas didn't let himself finish the thought. Night fell hard. They slept in turns. Silas didn't sleep at all. He watched the hills, the fire, the sled. Just before dawn, Annie touched his arm. Silas turned. She pointed past the fire, toward the ridge they'd crossed the day before. There, she whispered. Silas followed her finger. On the crest of the hill, silhouetted against the paling sky, stood a man in a black coat watching. Silas lifted his rifle. The man raised one hand, not in greeting but in acknowledgement, then turned and vanished into the rocks. Silas lowered the rifle slowly. Annie's voice was very small. That's blood, she said, pointing at the snow ahead. They left the ridge by first light. The tracks were gone, blown out by the wind or erased by hands that knew how to hide. But the feeling remained, low and certain. Someone had stood there, someone still watching. The black coat hadn't been a ghost. And now, ahead of them, Annie had spotted more blood. Silas crouched beside the patch, halfway down the slope, studying it in the pink light of dawn, different from before. This wasn't from a fall. Too much. It pooled dark and rust, thick, soaked into the snow like paint fresh, still wet at the edges. He motioned to Elijah, who came up behind him with quiet steps. Not ours, Silas said. Not Thomas's, either. Elijah leaned down. What do you make of that? Silas pointed to a drag mark, just visible beneath the crust. Somebody was hurt. But they kept moving. Elijah exhaled through his nose. You think they're fighting each other now? Silas stood slowly. I think somebody doesn't want the others to win. Annie stayed back by the sled, crouched beside her mother. Cora hadn't opened her eyes since midnight. Her breath had gone ragged, every few minutes catching like something sharp in her chest. Silas didn't say it out loud, but she wasn't just sick anymore. She was slipping. They moved downhill fast, following the draw into lower country, where the trees thinned and the snow turned to patches of slush. Mud sucked at Silas's boots. The land smelled of pine bark and iron. By mid-morning, Elijah raised a hand and stopped them with a single word. Quiet. He pointed downslope. A structure sat crooked in a small clearing, a lean-to, not more than a hunter's shelter. Smoke curled faintly from its chimney. No horses out front, no movement. Could be a trap, Silas said. Elijah gave a dry chuckle. At this point, what isn't? He passed his rifle to Silas. Stay with them. I'll go. Silas didn't like it, but he nodded. Elijah disappeared into the trees like he'd been born in them. Minutes passed. Annie whispered to her mother, but Cora didn't stir then. A whistle. Short. 2 notes. Silas moved. When they reached the lean-to, Elijah was crouched by the fire pit, talking to a man on the ground, thin, rag-wrapped, face drawn tight by hunger or fear. His left arm was bandaged in torn flannel, soaked dark with blood. Elijah. The man was saying, I told them not to come here. I told them you weren't the kind to hide things for strangers. Elijah didn't respond, just kept watching him. The man looked up and saw Silas. You the one with the girl? He asked. Silas nodded. They're coming. The man said, not the marshals. Not yet, these are bounty boys. 2 of 'em. Came in quiet. One's got a badge. The other just likes hurting people. Names? Silas asked. Didn't give 'em. But the tall one, the one with the coat, he said he had papers. Said the girl was property of the state, until a ruling could be made. Elijah stood, which means they planned to take her before any judge can see the truth. The injured man nodded. They were headed west, said they'd be waiting. Waiting where? The man hesitated. Old Line Shack. South Fork of the Gorge. 2 days out if you take the ridges. Silas looked to Elijah. We could ride there by dusk tomorrow. Not with her, Elijah said, motioning to Cora. Silas turned back to the man. Why'd they leave you alive? The man gave a bitter smile. They didn't. They left me bleeding. Figured I'd talk more that way. His smile faded. They're not taking her to a court, he said. They're taking her to disappear. Silas crouched, took the man's hand. What's your name? Reed. You got people? Reed shook his head. Had a brother in Rollins. Haven't seen him in years. Silas looked to Elijah. Give him food. Then bury him. Reed chuckled once. A dry rasp. Appreciate the optimism. They left the lean to before noon. Elijah stayed behind long enough to wrap Reed's arm tighter and feed him from his own pouch. When he caught up, he said nothing, but Silas saw it. Tightness in the jaw, hands balled in his coat. The rest of the day they moved faster south, then east again, winding through narrow canyons and frost-hardened switchbacks. Annie didn't speak once. She just kept her eyes on the sled, on her mother's still face. Her small hands clutched around the same fraying strip of blanket. That night, they made camp in the ruins of an old way station. Half walls and a rusted stove still bolted to the floor. No roof, no doors, but shelter enough. Cora woke once. Her voice was barely a breath. Annie. The girl was at her side in seconds. I'm here, she said. Cora reached up with a shaking hand, touched her daughter's cheek. Annie nodded. You remember the place? Yes. Silas stepped closer. What place? Cora's eyes found his, clouded and sharp all at once. Safety box. Number 32. The keys in my boot lining. Silas blinked. The one you're wearing. She gave a weak smile. Other boot. Elijah has it. I saw. Elijah swore under his breath. You think it's still there? Silas asked. Cora's hand fell away. If it's not, none of this matters. She slipped back into sleep. Silas turned to Elijah. You ever crack a bank box? Elijah gave him a look. Boy, I've cracked worse before breakfast. Silas sat near the fire, loading his rifle with slow hands. They know we're coming, he said. Elijah nodded. They want us to. They're betting we'll show up scared and slow. Silas shook his head. They're betting wrong. He looked at Annie. She was sitting by the stove, arms around her knees, staring into the coals, not crying, not blinking, just watching. She knows more than she should, and less than she'll need, Silas said, mostly to himself. Then he stood and started planning how to break into a bank that wanted them dead. The sky over Lander was the color of ash. They reached the edge of town at first light, the horses blown and ragged, the sled hidden a half-mile out beneath pine branches and snow. Elijah had scouted the road in silence. Now he stood beside Silas on the ridge, both of them staring down at the buildings, huddled close like men in a fistfight. Too quiet. Elijah muttered, No carts, no smoke. Looks like church, but it's Wednesday. Silas adjusted the rifle strap on his back. They're here, he said. You sure? No one clears out of town for the weather. They descended slow, keeping to back alleys and fence lines. Lander wasn't big. Just one main street and a few shacks trailing off like dead limbs. The bank sat dead center. 2 stories, brick, its windows dark, the big iron door shut, but not locked. Silas tried the handle and it moved under his hand. That's not a good sign, Elijah said. They stepped inside. The air was still, cold, smelled of paper and oil. The tellers' cages were empty. One stool knocked over, dust unsettled. They moved past the front room, into the hall behind. Offices, records, a staircase going down. Elijah nodded toward it. "Vault'll be below. You watch the stairs," Silas said. "I'll check the rest of the floor." They split up. Silas passed the office doors one by one, hand on his pistol. Nothing moved, no voices, no heat from the stoves. Then, a creak behind him. He spun. No one. But something had shifted. He turned again, stepped into the last office. It was furnished better than the rest. Rugs, polished desk, whiskey on the shelf. Someone had been living here. The glass of the lantern on the desk was still warm. Silas reached out, touched the edge of the desk blotter, and froze. A single paper lay centered on the leather, typed, official, his name at the top, Silas Reed. Below it, a single line in boldy, knowingly harboring a ward of the state. The penalty: indefinite detainment pending federal review. He heard the click of a hammer before he felt the barrel touch the back of his neck. "Put the gun down, son." The voice was calm, older, confident. Silas didn't move. "Turn around slow," the voice said. He did. The man wore a black coat, dark gray vest, no badge, a lawyer's build. Soft hands, eyes like split glass. "Mr. Reed," the man said, "we've been looking for you." Silas stared at the pistol. "You're not a marshal." "I don't need to be. The paper's enough." The man motioned toward the desk. "You've read it. You understand the gravity. Where's the girl?" The man smiled. "Safe, eh? For now. You made this harder than it needed to be. But we're adaptable." Silas took a slow breath. "So this was never about the mother?" "Of course not," the man said. "She was a container. The girl is the key." "To what?" "To legacy. To power. To a deed no one wanted uncovered." He stepped closer. "She has no claim, you understand. Not anymore. Not legally. The Whitlock estate has seen to that. But emotion, well, that clouds the public view. And men like you make things worse." Silas stared at him. Then he moved. Fast. He ducked, twisted the pistol upward just as it fired. The shot tore through the wall. Silas slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, sent him crashing backward into the desk. The gun skidded across the floor. Silas went for it. But another man stepped through the door, big, beard like barbed wire, shotgun raised. "Easy now," the big man said. Silas froze. Behind him, the lawyer stood, brushing dust from his lapel. "I was hoping we could keep this civilized," the man said, "but I've learned to expect disappointments." He nodded to the big man. "Take him below." Silas didn't resist, not yet. They led him down the narrow stairs into the vault. It wasn't what he expected. No shelves of gold, no stacks of cash, just a single chair bolted to the floor, and a girl in the corner, Annie, tied at the wrists, gagged, eyes wide but dry. The big man shoved Silas into the chair. The lawyer followed, brushing his coat sleeve again, like it offended him to be underground. "You don't understand what you've done," he said. Silas leaned forward. "No," he said. "You don't understand who you took." The door to the vault swung open again. A third man entered, tall, thin, younger, wearing a marshal's badge. "Sir," the young marshal said, nodding to the lawyer. "You said not to act until the judge arrived. He's late." The lawyer snapped, "And Mr. Reed here forced our hand." The marshal looked at Silas. "You got anything to say?" Silas looked at Annie, then at the badge. "You're not here for law," he said. "You're here for cleanup." The marshal hesitated. Then he raised his pistol. Silas moved before it cleared the holster. He kicked backward, chair and all, into the lawyer's knees. The man crumpled with a cry. Annie ducked. The marshal fired too late. The shot went high, shattered a light. Elijah's voice rang from the stairs. "Drop it." The shotgun thundered. The big man fell first. Face down, blood pooling. Silas rolled, grabbed the fallen pistol, shot the marshal in the thigh. The man screamed, dropped his weapon. Elijah entered, smoke rising from his shotgun, face cold as stone. "You all right?" he asked. Silas didn't answer. He was already at Annie's side, cutting the ropes. "You came," she whispered. "Always was," he said. She didn't cry, just stood up and reached for his hand. The lawyer groaned from the floor. "You won't get far," he spat. "This is federal. It's already filed." Elijah stepped over him. "Then I guess we'll unfile it." They left the vault, fast. No time for the safety box, no time for plans. But they had Annie, and she was the only thing that mattered now. "We're not running anymore," Silas said. "We're choosing the ground we'll stand on." They didn't stop moving until the town was a memory behind them. By the time the sun dipped below the ridge, Silas had led them 10 miles into the backcountry, cutting through scrubland and dry creek beds, moving not for distance but for cover. Annie rode the same lame mare they'd taken from the livery yard. Quiet, sure-footed, and ugly as sin, Elijah followed close behind with the rifles, and what little food they'd pulled from the bank kitchen on the way out. Nobody spoke until full dark. They camped in the hollow of a box canyon, tucked behind an outcrop of rock that broke the wind and blocked the sky. Annie sat beside Silas by the fire, her knees drawn to her chest, wrapped in a blanket Elijah had carried for 20 years. "They knew about the safety box," she said. Silas didn't answer right away. He was stripping the last of the jerky into strips, rationing it by habit. "You're sure?" he asked. "I saw it," she said. "One of the men, before you got there. He had a paper with the box number on it. 32. Elijah looked up from where he was oiling his shotgun. "That means one of two things. Either they found the key before your ma hid it." "She didn't," Annie said quickly. Elijah nodded. "Then someone else told them." Silas looked into the fire. Someone who knew where it was and what was in it. But they didn't open it. Annie said. They were still waiting. Silas tossed a stick onto the flames. Sparks kicked up. "Because they needed something else," he said. "The key's just half of it. The bank requires 2 forms of ID for disputed family claims. And you, Annie," he looked at her, "you're the other half." Elijah leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "So this ain't just about silver and land. It's about control." Silas nodded. "Control of a name, of a bloodline. Maybe," Elijah added, "of what that name is tied to. Contracts, deeds, votes." Annie looked between them. "So what happens now?" Silas looked at her, this child who had seen death, fire, flight, and betrayal, all without flinching. She deserved to stop running. She deserved a home. But they weren't there yet. "We go to Judge Whitfield," he said. "You said he's still riding circuit east of here." Elijah nodded. "Due to hold court in Split Rock in 3 days. We get there first. We get you sworn, Annie, under protection of a court. Once that happens, nobody can claim you without due process." Annie's lip trembled, just for a moment. "And Mama?" Silas's jaw worked. "If she makes it back to Lander alive, she can join us. But if she doesn't, we'll still carry her truth." Elijah folded the cleaning cloth, stowed the shotgun. "There's a problem," he said. Silas raised an eyebrow. "Just one." Elijah gave him a look. "Split Rock's got 2 roads in, and both are watched." Silas nodded. "Then we don't take the road." The next day, they moved early, keeping to dry washes and high ground, crossing open stretches only when they had no choice. Every hour they gained felt stolen. Twice they saw riders in the distance. Black dots moving fast, scanning. They stayed ahead, until the 3rd day, just after noon, as they crossed a shallow ridge. The wind shifted, and so did the sound. Elijah froze, held up a hand. Silas heard it too. Hoofbeats, close, too close. Then a shout, sharp, guttural. They'd been spotted. "Doan!" Silas yelled. They dove behind a low rock wall, the mare spooking and yanking Annie sideways. Silas grabbed her arm, hauled her into the scrub just as bullets chewed through the dirt behind them. "They're flanking!" Elijah called out, shotgun raised. Silas scanned the slope. 4 riders. Black coats, 2 ahead, 2 behind, no way out unless... He turned to Annie, voice low. "You remember what your mama said about the place?" Annie nodded. "The mine shaft." "Mostly. That'll have to do." He grabbed Elijah by the conied cover. 10 minutes. "Can you buy us that?" Elijah grinned, eyes hard. "I can buy you 15. Then he stood and ran sideways across the ridge, firing as he moved, yelling like a man twice his size. The gunmen split, 2 following. Silas didn't wait. He pulled Annie to her feet and ran, ducking low, following her lead as she darted through the underbrush, past boulders and stumps until they reached a stand of cottonwoods. There, hidden beneath roots and a collapsed wagon axle, was the entrance, barely wide enough for a child. "Go," Silas said, shoving Annie inside. He followed, scraping his back on stone, rifle slung tight inside. It was black, damp, and it stank of old air and something long dead. Annie led the way, fingers trailing the wall. Left, she whispered. Then right. Behind them voices echoed, close. Silas turned once, fired, heard a scream. Then more gunfire. Run, he said. They did. The shaft twisted down, then up again, then broke into a wider chamber. Moonlight poured in from a broken wall. An old collapse. They burst out into the open. Another canyon, empty, safe, for now. Silas grabbed her shoulder. You all right? She nodded, breathing hard. Her cheek was scraped. Blood on her sleeve. Behind them, the shaft stayed quiet. Elijah didn't come out. Not yet. Silas raised his rifle, covering the gap. Annie looked up at him. You think he made it? Silas didn't answer. Then, footsteps, slow, heavy. Elijah emerged, limping, coat torn, face streaked with blood and suit, but alive. He grinned at them both. 15 minutes on the dot, he said, and collapsed. Silas caught him, laid him gently on the rock. Annie knelt beside them. Silas said, he just needs to stop being a hero for a minute. Elijah coughed. Don't count on it. Silas looked east, toward the road they'd find in the next valley, toward Split Rock, toward the judge. He adjusted his grip on the rifle. They think we're running, he said. They still don't understand. We're marching toward the law, not away from it. Split Rock looked like every other dust-bitten town west of the divide. 3 buildings too many, 2 wells too few, and a wind that never quite stopped howling. Silas spotted the courthouse first, not because it was large, but because it was made of stone, granite hauled in from God knew where, sun-bleached and proud. The only real permanence in a town built for passing through. Annie rode beside him, silent in the saddle, her boots not reaching the stirrups. Elijah was behind them, upright but leaning, his limp worse than yesterday. He hadn't said a word since they crossed the ridge at dawn. They reached the edge of town just after mid-morning. No shots, no riders, no black coats. Still, Silas didn't relax. We go quiet, he said. No eye contact, no hesitation. Annie nodded. Elijah just grunted. They left the horses at the stable under false names, paid in coin, not questions, then moved through back alleys until the courthouse filled their view again. It stood squat and square at the end of Main, shutters open, flag half raised. A man with a badge sat on the steps, chewing something unpleasant and staring at nothing. Silas walked up with Annie close beside him. You the bailiff? He asked. The man looked up, squinted. Who's askin'? We need a word with Judge Whitfield. Court's not in session till tomorrow. Silas leaned in. It's about a custody claim. Fraudulent. The bailiff stood. You the ones from Lander? Elijah tensed behind them. Silas's jaw locked. What's that supposed to mean? The man spat. We got telegrams saying a man and girl might show, said to detain you till federal review. Who sent them? Didn't say. Marshall's office in Cheyenne, maybe. Silas stepped forward. Is the judge here? The man hesitated. He's inside. You wait here. He turned and went up the steps, boots heavy on the stone. Silas turned to Annie. Listen to me, he said. No matter what happens, you don't say anything unless he asks you direct, understand? Annie looked up at him. I remember what Mama said. What's that? That truth don't help if it comes too late. The door opened. A voice called, Bring em in. They entered a room too large for the town around it. Tall ceilings, rows of benches, a dais at the far end. The judge sat behind it, no robe, just a long coat and wire-rimmed glasses, the kind no one sold anymore. He didn't rise. Name? He asked. Silas Reed. And the girl? Annie Whitlock, daughter of Cora Whitlock. We're here to file a protection claim against unlawful detainment. The judge stared at him a long moment. Have a seat, he said. Silas and Annie sat on the front bench. Elijah leaned against the wall near the door, arms folded. You have proof of identity? The judge asked. Silas reached into his coat, pulled out the key Cora had hidden. This unlocks box 32 at the Bank of Lander. Her mother told us what's inside. Letters, documents, blood records. The judge looked at the key. You been to Lander? We tried. They were waiting. But no federal mines. Duh. Names. Silas listed them. The judge wrote each down slowly. And your relation to the girl? I have none, Silas said plainly. But I gave my word to her mother. And I won't break it. The judge looked at Annie. She sat still, spine straight, face unreadable. Miss Whitlock. The judge said, "Do you understand why you're here?" "Yes, sir." "Do you know who wants to take you?" She nodded. "Men with suits. And a badge that don't mean what it should." The judge's eyes flicked upward at that. "Your mother. She's still living." "We don't know," Annie said. "She was sick. Bad. We had to leave her behind." The judge was quiet a long time, then he looked at the bailiff. "Send a wire to Lander. Confirm box 32 exists. Have them seal it until I give order." The bailiff nodded and left. Then the judge stood. "You're not the first to come here with a child and a story," he said. "Some lie. Some break down under the weight of the truth. Some run until the desert eats them." He walked around the bench, stopped in front of Silas. "But you came here with a limp man and a loaded gun. That tells me something." Silas didn't blink. "I'm not asking for favors," he said. "Just law." The judge nodded. "You'll have it." Then the doors slammed open. 3 men entered, 2 in suits, 1 with a star, the marshal, Judge Whitfield. The lead man said, "Under authority granted by the Federal Bureau of Custodial Affairs, we demand immediate release of the child into protective state custody." Annie stood behind Silas, not shaking. "On what grounds?" the judge asked, voice steel. The man held up a stack of papers. "Improper guardianship. Harboring a minor without claim. Obstruction of federal investigation." The judge took the papers, glanced through them, then tore them in half. "This is my court," he said, "and until I see proper evidence of endangerment or harm, the child stays under protection here." The marshal stepped forward. "That's not how this works." "It is now," the judge said, "and if you raise that hand again I'll see it shot off." Silas didn't move, but Elijah already had his shotgun leveled. The marshal froze. The lead man's voice was colder now. "You don't understand what this girl is tied to." "I don't care," the judge replied. The man sneered. "You will." They backed out slowly, like wolves from a fire. When the doors closed again, the judge turned to Silas. "You'll stay here tonight. I'll file the injunction in the morning." Silas nodded. Annie exhaled for the first time that night. They slept on cots in the basement of the courthouse. Silas didn't sleep. Neither did Elijah at dawn. Before the judge could speak his ruling, the telegraph line was cut. "They're not trying to win anymore," Elijah said. "They're trying to erase the board entirely." The wires were down, not just cut, ripped from the poles, coiled like dead snakes in the dust outside town. Elijah found them before breakfast, came back into the courthouse with his jaw tight and his coat still open. "They took their time with it," he said, dropping the bundle of copper onto the floor. "Didn't want to risk us sending anything." The judge stood at the window, staring out toward the telegraph shack across the road. His mouth was a hard line. "Means they're not waiting for legal remedy." He said no. Silas agreed. "They're preparing for something louder." The judge turned. "You still carrying?" Silas tapped his coat. "Always." The judge looked to Elijah. "How many men in this town still know how to stand a line?" Elijah shrugged. "Maybe 5. 6 if you count the preacher. But 2 of 'em got eyes like boiled eggs, and 1 shakes so bad I wouldn't trust him with a broom." "Then we don't make a line," the judge said. "We make a trap." Annie sat by the stove, folding and refolding the same strip of linen, the one her mother had tied around her wrist before she'd fallen sick. She wasn't crying, wasn't asking questions, just watching, listening. Silas knelt in front of her. "They'll come for you, Annie. I know. We'll do everything we can to stop them, but if something goes wrong..." She looked him dead in the eye. "I won't let them take me." It stopped him cold. There was no tremble in her voice, just something old and clear, like steel. He swallowed. "You won't have to." They spent the morning boarding up windows, laying broken glass beneath the eaves, hiding rifles in the pews of the tiny church beside the courthouse. The judge sent the bailiff riding south toward the next relay town, but none of them expected him to make it. No telegram, no witnesses, no backup. At noon the sky changed. Dark clouds rolled from the west, fast, low, gray like wood smoke. Thunder in the distance. The wind picked up, then died just as quickly, like it had inhaled and held its breath. Elijah stood in the center of Main Street, shotgun at his side. "They'll use the storm," he said. "Cover noise. Muzzle flashes. Movin' while we're blind." Silas adjusted his coat. You ever fight in a whiteout? Not where I walked out the only one breathing. They split. Silas took the roof of the saloon, Elijah the stable. The judge remained in the courthouse with Annie. They had agreed if it turned, she was to be hidden in the cold chute beneath the courthouse floor. Small enough for her to fit, too narrow for a man to follow without a fight. At dusk they came, no wagons, no calls of warning, just shapes moving through the wind, black coats flapping like torn sails, rifles slung low, boots making no sound in the dust. Silas saw them first. 3 down the east side, another pair near the church. He waited. Then fired. 1 dropped. Another staggered and ran. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the town, scattered and sharp. Windows shattered. Horses screamed in the stable. Somewhere. Elijah shouted something too broken to make out. Then his shotgun barked in reply. Silas kept low, moving across the roofline, counting shots. 6, 7, 8. They weren't amateurs. At the courthouse, the doors slammed open. 2 men rushed inside. Silas swore and jumped, hit the ground hard, rolled, shoulder screaming, got up, ran. Inside, the judge had dropped 1 man with his old Navy Colt. The other was dragging Annie by the collar, pistol to her temple, eyes wide. Drop it. Silas shouted. The man didn't, so Silas shot him in the leg. The man screamed and went down, gun clattering across the floor. Annie didn't move, just stepped back, picked up the pistol, and held it like she'd been born with it in her hand. The judge stared at her, then nodded once. They secured the door. Outside, the wind rose louder, screaming now. Elijah stumbled in 5 minutes later, blood down 1 sleeve, a gash across his cheekbone. 3 more down. He gasped, but 1 got into the stable. They heard it then. A scream, high sharp. Silas ran. He reached the stable and found the preacher, old Marcus Greeley, pinned to the ground, coughing blood. Above him stood the lawyer, the same one from Lander, black coat soaked to the elbows, calm eyes. Mr. Reed, he said, I told you. The girl is not your concern. She's not yours either. The lawyer stepped forward. You think this ends with courtrooms and papers. It doesn't. It ends when those papers are ash, and that girl's name is forgotten. Silas raised his rifle. The lawyer didn't flinch. You won't shoot me, he said, because deep down you're still hoping this can be done clean. Silas hesitated. Just long enough. The lawyer smiled. Then Elijah stepped from the shadows behind him and broke a shovel across his back. The lawyer dropped like a stone. Silas exhaled. Thought you were bleeding out, he said. Not till I finish this, Elijah replied. They dragged the lawyer into the jailhouse, locked him in the single cell. The man hissed. Already do, Elijah said. Mostly 'cause we didn't shoot you instead. That night, they didn't sleep. Annie curled beside the stove. The judge sat at his desk, eyes on the door. Silas stood watch with Elijah, rifles across their knees. At dawn, the clouds broke, light returned. And with it, the sound of hooves. 4 men rode in slow, badges shining, hats low, real marshals. The bailiff had made it, and he'd brought the cavalry. The judge stood on the courthouse steps and raised 1 hand. It's done, he said. Let the record show. Split Rock stood its ground. Silas looked down at Annie. She looked older, somehow tired, but standing. That storm didn't come for us, she said softly. It came to see who we really were underneath. The sun rose cleaner the next morning, as if the storm had scarred more than just the sky. Inside the courthouse, Judge Whitfield inked the final page of the emergency injunction and stamped it with his seal. The document was simple, but its weight was enormous. It granted Annie Wetlock temporary protective status under territorial law, pending full hearing. Silas stood with Elijah just outside the door, watching the judge work. Neither man said anything for a while. You think it'll hold? Elijah asked finally. Silas didn't answer right away. He watched Annie through the window. She was helping the bailiff sweep up broken glass from the church pews. No one asked her to. She just saw it needed doing. I think it'll hold until someone with more power says it doesn't, Silas said. And then? Silas rubbed the back of his neck. Then we make them look her in the eye before they try. Judge Whitfield stepped outside, paper in hand. You'll need to head back to Lander, he said. The safety box. If the girl's claim is to stick, we'll need what's in there. Originals. Signatures. Elijah made a face. You want us to walk back into the hornet's nest we just limped out of? I want this done right. The judge said, You beat them once with bullets. Now you beat them with proof. Silas nodded. And Annie, she stays, the judge said, under court protection. I'll sign guardianship over to myself until the claim's processed. Annie stopped sweeping when Silas crouched beside her. You're leaving, she said. Just for a little, he replied. We'll be fast. Do I have to stay? He hesitated. It's the only way to keep this legal. Annie looked at him. You think I care about legal? Silas smiled. You're starting to sound like your mother. She didn't smile back. Promise me something. Anything. If you don't come back, don't let them tell me it was clean. He looked at her, surprised. Say it was hard. She continued. Say it hurt. Don't make it pretty. Silas stood slowly. It won't be. By noon, they were riding. The marshals gave them 2 fresh mounts, sealed court orders, and 1 satchel of supplies. No escort. Too risky. Whitfield didn't want word spreading that Annie had lived through it all. Elijah rode quieter than usual. His bandages were tight. But the way he held the reins said pain hadn't gone far. They took the long road west, skirting known trails and avoiding open ridgelines. By the second day, the wind was warm again, spring trying to punch through the frost. They reached Lander at dusk, or what was left of it. The bank had burned. Charred beams jutted from the stone foundation. The iron vault door still stood, blackened but unbroken. Smoke stained the buildings around it. No bodies, no sounds. Just silence and ruin. Elijah stared at the wreck. Guess they figured if they couldn't have what was inside, they'd make sure no one else did. Silas finished. The vault was sealed, but the judge's orders got them in. One of the marshals back in Split Rock had wired ahead to a contact in the Lander precinct. A locksmith met them an hour later, hands trembling as he picked the mechanisms by lantern light. It took 45 minutes. When the door groaned open, dust spilled out like breath. Inside it was cold, dead cold and dry. Box 32 sat where Cora had said, low row, center column. The key turned. Inside a bundle of letters. A silver locket. A folded deed with 3 names and 4 signatures. And a single piece of paper, older than the rest, a birth certificate, Annie's, signed by Thomas Whitlock. Silas let out a slow breath. We have her name, he said. And we have his. Elijah added, that'll burn hotter than any bullet. They packed everything into a case, sealed it, and marked it with the judge's stamp. But when they turned to leave, Elijah hesitated. There's something else here, he said. Silas frowned. What do you mean? Elijah pointed to a second box, unmarked. He pried it open with his knife. Inside, drawings, inked maps, a mining claim signed in a dead man's hand. Whitlock's land, Elijah said, but not the ranch. This is north, near the pass. Silas turned the map over. There was a word scrawled across the back, inheritance. They stared at it, then packed it too. They left Lander under cover of night. No fire, no trail. Just 2 men and a satchel of papers heavier than any weapon they'd carried. On the 3rd day, it started raining, cold, slow, soaking everything. Elijah coughed most of the morning. Silas kept the pace steady, not pushing. They'd done the hard part. Now all that mattered was getting back, until the rider appeared, just one, on the ridge behind them, far enough to seem harmless, close enough to mean trouble. Silas spotted him at dusk. He's not lost, he said. He's watching. Elijah squinted back through the rain. Could be scouting. Silas checked the satchel straps again. Tightened them. If he rides closer, we drop him. Elijah finished, but the rider didn't approach, not that night. He just stayed, a silhouette on the horizon, like a shadow. With patience, they made camp behind a ridge, half sheltered from the wind. Silas didn't sleep, neither did the shadow. This ain't pursuit, Elijah said, voice low. It's a reminder. We're not carrying paper anymore. We're carrying a revolution in her name. The rider didn't follow at dawn. He waited, perched on the far ridge, motionless as a fence post, horse shifting beneath him, but never breaking forward. Silas caught glimpses of him through the trees as they moved. Always just far enough to avoid a clear shot, always close enough to know he was there. He's not here to stop us, Elijah muttered. He's here to count the hours. Silas kept the rifle ready across his lap. or wait for someone else to catch up. They pushed harder, cutting south off the main trail, then doubling back west to avoid a drawbridge washed out by spring thaw. Every shortcut added another delay. Every delay widened the gap between the law they carried and the reach of the law behind them. By the second night, Elijah's cough was worse. Silas made camp by a broken stone marker near the old Mormon trail, laid kindling under a granite overhang to keep the smoke low. He watched Elijah spit blood into a rag when he thought no one was looking. "You need rest," Silas said. Elijah chuckled, a dry, bitter sound. "Rest when the ink's dry on that court seal. You won't last if you don't slow down." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "And let you ride into Split Rock alone with a satchel full of stolen truth, and no witness but your word." Silas didn't argue. There wasn't time. The next morning, they broke camp early, riding hard through the low valleys, hooves wet from creek crossings, and the mist that hadn't burned off yet. The trail curved around a rock bluff around noon, and there he was, the rider, closer this time, blocking the trail. He didn't raise a weapon, didn't call out, just sat there, face in shadow beneath a wide, brimmed hat, oilskin coat flapping loose in the wind. Silas slowed. Elijah pulled up beside him, breathing heavy. The rider finally spoke. "You've got something doesn't belong to you." His voice was young, too young for the lines on his coat or the cold in his tone. Silas didn't answer. The rider continued, "Turn around. Leave the girl's claim in the dirt. Maybe you walk away." Silas stared at him. "You one of theirs?" The rider shrugged. "Don't matter. I'm the last one they'll send." Elijah spat. "That's supposed to scare us." The rider smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not here to scare you." He dismounted, moved like he wasn't carrying weight at all. Silas stepped down too, rifle in hand. The rider saw it, didn't flinch. "You shoot me," he said. "Someone else rides in after. But you hand over the satchel, you get to keep breathing." Silas didn't move. The wind shifted. Elijah whispered, "Fast." "I know. Faster than you. Maybe?" The rider shifted his stance, right hand lowered, left heel back, gunslinger's posture. Silas didn't blink. "I gave a promise," he said, "and I won't break it for a man who hides his name behind a cause he can't name." The rider exhaled slow, then reached for his gun. Silas fired first. The shot tore through the rider's shoulder, spun him sideways, blood spraying the rocks. He went down hard, gun clattering across the gravel. Elijah was already moving, shotgun raised in case the rider twitched. But he didn't. Silas stepped over the body, crouched beside him. The rider looked up, eyes wide. Not with pain, but with confusion. "You weren't supposed to." Silas leaned close. "Maybe next time don't bet on a man who's already lost everything once." They buried the rider in the dry wash beneath a half-dead pine. No name, no marker, just dust and silence. They rode the rest of that day without speaking. By nightfall, Split Rock came into view, lantern lights in the distance, steady as stars. The courthouse sat dark, but the roof was intact. No smoke, no screams, no flags raised in warning. But Silas felt it. Something off, too still. They rode in quiet, stabled the horses without waking the boy in the loft. Crossed the square to the courthouse. Door unlocked. Inside empty. No judge, no bailiff, no Annie. Elijah turned to Silas, face pale. "This isn't right." Silas moved room to room. The cot she'd slept in. Made. Her blanket, gone. The cold chute, open. But no signs of a struggle. Then he saw it. On the judge's desk, a single sheet of paper, signed in the judge's hand. Removed to secure location pending federal investigation. Silas gripped the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles went white. "They took her." Elijah said, "No." Silas muttered, "She's gone." Silas, "No," he repeated, louder, "not without a fight." He turned, eyes burning. "They didn't break in. He let them." "You think Whitfield flipped?" "I think they found his price." Elijah stepped closer. "So what now?" Silas looked at the empty cot, at the paper, at the fire that had been burning since the moment he found a girl kneeling beside her dead mother. He slung the rifle back over his shoulder. "Now we stop asking," he said. "Now we take her back, before they teach her to forget who she is." They rode before dawn. No trail, no tracks, just a direction. And a name, Bitterhouse. It wasn't on any map, not anymore. Elijah remembered it from years ago, before the war. A mining camp turned ghost town. then bought up by speculators with long money and no conscience. The kind of place the law forgot and power remembered. Only 2 roads in. Elijah said as they climbed the ridge. Both watched. If they're smart. Silas nodded. So we don't take the road. They led the horses through a dry gully, then tied them beneath an outcrop, hidden from the main path. The rest they'd do on foot. It was near midday when they reached the outer edge of Bitterhouse. No signs, no flags, just a cluster of low buildings warped by sun and time, and a new structure rising behind them. Clean wood, fresh nails, and armed guards posted at the corners. A courthouse in name only. Elijah studied it from behind a fallen fence. They built their own court, he said. Silas scanned the yard. Means they don't trust Whitfield to stay bought. And Annie, inside. Somewhere. They waited until dark, then moved. They used the shadows of the burned-out miners' cabins, stepping from ruin to ruin, boots silent on ash and dust. The guards were lazy, used to threats from outside, not ghosts slipping through the bones of the town. They reached the back of the new courthouse, just after midnight, a cellar door, locked, but old. Elijah popped it with a pry bar, wincing as the metal squealed. Silas went in first. The air was cold and wet, thick with rot and mold. They moved past crates and broken desks until they found the stairs. And at the top, a voice, not Annie's, a man, pacing, talking to someone too quiet to respond. They reached the landing, peered through the crack in the door. The lawyer was there, same one from Lander, coat clean, smile back on his face. Across from him sat Annie, hands tied, face calm, too calm. She hasn't eaten, the lawyer said, but that's all right. Hunger clarifies. He leaned in close. All that fire your mother gave you, it'll burn out eventually. You'll see. Every strong horse breaks when you learn the right way to whisper. Annie didn't blink, didn't speak, just stared. The lawyer stood. Tomorrow we file. New name. New papers. Your mother was sick, confused. You were in danger. We rescued you. That's the story now. He walked toward the back hallway and disappeared. Silas didn't wait. He burst through the door, rifle raised, Elijah behind him. Annie didn't flinch. About time, she said. Silas knelt, cut the ropes from her wrists. You all right? I will be, she said. Footsteps sounded down the hall. Elijah moved to the door, shotgun ready. Silas turned to Annie. Can you walk? She nodded. He handed her a revolver. Then let's go. They moved fast, but not fast enough. 2 guards were already in the hallway when Elijah opened the door. One dropped from the first shot. The other raised his rifle. But Annie fired first. The bullet hit his shoulder. He went down screaming. Elijah turned. Still think she needed saving. Silas almost smiled. They ran through the halls, past courtrooms still being built, through half-hung doors and rooms full of ink that hadn't dried. The front entrance was barred, so they went up, to the roof. From there, they could see the whole compound. Floodlights, fences, a stable to the east, a row of cabins to the west, and more men waking. Elijah cursed. We can't outrun all of them. We're not going to. Silas handed the satchel of documents to Annie. You take this. You get to the fence. Head north. Find the ridge, then the creek. I'll be behind you. Annie looked at him. You're not coming with me. I will, he said. But someone's got to buy the minutes. Elijah stepped forward. Wes, that's both of us, then. Annie clutched the satchel. She hesitated, then hugged Silas hard. Don't die being noble, she whispered. It's a stupid way to go. He smiled. Then I'll just be practical. She ran, down the fire stairs, over the stable roof, into the dark. Silas turned to Elijah. You sure about this? Elijah cracked his neck. Only thing I've been sure of since the war. They waited until they saw flashlights converging below, then opened fire. It was fast, loud, brutal. Guards dropped. Shouts echoed. A siren began to wail. Long, low, synthetic. That wasn't for the guards, that was for the man at the top. The lawyer stepped out onto the balcony, flanked by 2 men in tan suits. He spotted Silas immediately. You again, he said. Always where you don't belong. Silas chambered another round. You don't get to name where I belong. Your girl's already gone. You'll never catch her. I don't need to, Silas said. She doesn't run anymore. Then he pulled the trigger. The balcony shattered. The suits scrambled. The lawyer ducked, swearing. Silas turned to Elijah. Go. I'll hold here. Elijah said. You find her. And this. Silas hesitated, then ran. He dropped off the back of the courthouse, cut east, found the trail of small boots in the dust leading toward the creek bed. Shots still rang behind him, but fewer now, and farther. He followed the trail through the brush, heart pounding, rifle low. Then a shadow moved ahead, Annie, running, satchel in hand. But she wasn't alone. A figure broke from the trees to her left, another guard. Knife drawn, Silas shouted. Too late, the man lunged, Annie fell, Silas fired. The guard dropped, shot clean through the chest. Silas reached her seconds later. You okay? She nodded. I kept running. He pulled her close, breathing hard. They were still alive, barely. In the distance, the compound was chaos. But behind them, the creek whispered. Moving, carrying free. They tried to make her forget. Silas said quietly. But she remembered loud enough to make the whole damn world listen. 3 weeks later, the wind in Split Rock was warmer, softer, the kind that blew through open windows, not through broken glass. Judge Whitfield was gone. Resigned under pressure 2 days after the hearing. No one said where he went. No one seemed to care. The courthouse remained, and inside it, on a quiet Tuesday morning, the final ruling was read aloud in a room that had once been empty and silent. The court recognizes the claim of Annabelle Whitlock as legitimate and binding. The new judge said, custody is granted to Silas Reed, by request of the claimant and under written authorization by the deceased, Cora Whitlock. The land title associated with Claim 17B is reinstated. Case closed. No cheers, no clapping, just a slow exhale from Elijah. Seated in the back row with a cane between his knees and a bandage still wrapped beneath his collar, Silas sat beside Annie, hands folded. He didn't smile. She didn't either. Not yet. Outside, the world kept moving. Later that day, they stood together on the edge of the property line north of town. Just past the old mining trail, the deed in Silas's coat, the satchel finally empty. Nothing marked the land yet, just grass, rock, and sky. Annie looked out over it all. You think she ever came up here? She asked. Silas took off his hat. Maybe. She should have owned it her whole life. She does now, he said. They stood in silence for a long time. Then Annie reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver locket from box 32. She opened it. Inside was the photo. Faded but whole. Cora, holding a baby, wind in her hair, smile like the end of winter. I thought I wanted to forget, Annie said softly, after she died. I thought forgetting would hurt less. Silas glanced at her. And now, I don't want quiet, she said. I want memory. All of it, even the hard parts. He nodded. They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. Instead, they got to work. Elijah helped where he could. Mending fence posts, boiling coffee, drawing maps from memory of where the wells used to be. He said he'd stay till spring, then maybe longer. Annie took to the land fast. She didn't smile much. But when she did, it came from somewhere honest. Silas rebuilt the barn with salvaged wood, hammered nails with steady hands, slept better than he had in years, and on the first truly warm night, after the stars came out clean and wide, Annie sat beside the fire and finally asked, Do you think we're safe now? Silas stared into the flames. I think safety's a story we tell ourselves when we're too tired to fight. She considered that. Then I hope we never get that tired. He looked at her. You won't, he said. You've got her in you. Annie didn't answer. She just reached for another log, tossed it on the fire, and watched it catch. In the end, nothing grand marked the victory. No parades, no headlines, just a piece of land, a name that stayed hers, and a man who kept his promise. Because sometimes, the most human thing we can do is stand still, when everything else says run, and say this is who I am, and no one gets to take it.